Most people think they're broke because they don't make enough money. That if the paycheck were just a little bigger, the pressure would finally ease. But that's not what's happening. If you've ever delayed a repair because it could probably wait, if you've ever watched a small charge hit your account and felt your stomach tighten, if one unexpected bill could quietly derail your entire month, then this isn't about income. There's a hidden math running underneath your life. A math that turns small problems into expensive disasters the moment you lose margin. And it always starts the same way, with a problem small enough to ignore. A young family moves into a modest home. Nothing fancy. 2 incomes tight, but manageable. One morning, the hot water pressure in the shower drops, not completely gone, just weaker than usual. The kind of thing you notice, but not enough to panic. A plumber could fix it early. A failing pressure relief valve, a simple replacement. Somewhere between $180 and $250. Annoying but contained. The problem is timing. The checking account is thin that week. Rent just cleared. Childcare is coming up. Groceries are already on a credit card. There isn't spare cash sitting around for a problem that still sort of works. So the family does what almost everyone does in that position. They wait, they take shorter showers, they tell themselves it's probably mineral buildup. They promise to deal with it next month. When things are less tight, the system doesn't break immediately. It rarely does. It degrades quietly. 6 weeks later, the water heater fails completely. No hot water. No slow leak, no warning this time. The unit is old, and the untreated pressure issue finally does what pressure always does. It finds the weakest point. Now it's not a $200 repair. It's a replacement. A basic water heater installation runs between $1,400 and $1,800. Emergency scheduling adds a premium. One parent takes a day off work to be home for the install. That's another $200 in lost income. The total cost settles just under $2,000. Nothing about this outcome required bad decisions. No luxury spending, no irresponsibility. Just a small problem meeting a system with no margin. This is the part most people misunderstand. The system didn't punish this family for being careless. It didn't target them for doing something wrong. It simply charged more because the problem was handled later instead of sooner. That's how the math works. When you have cash on hand, problems stay small. They are treated early. When they're cheap, predictable, and contained. When you don't, time becomes an accelerant. Every delay adds complexity. Every cohort increases the eventual bill. The cost isn't linear. It's exponential. The difference between paying $200 and paying $2,000 wasn't knowledge. It wasn't effort. It wasn't even income in the long run. It was margin. The ability to absorb a hit before it spread. This is why so many people feel like they're constantly doing damage control. Not because their lives are unusually chaotic, but because their financial systems are running at full capacity all the time. There's no slack, no buffer, no room for small errors to stay small. And once you see that pattern, it becomes hard to ignore. Because this wasn't a freak accident. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't unique to this family or this house. It follows a rule, one that can be explained, measured, and traced back long before modern plumbing ever existed. You see the same math show up again and again in different forms across history. And it was described clearly, long ago, with a much simpler example. The idea is often told like a parable, which makes it easy to dismiss a story about boots, a fictional character, a clever metaphor. But Sam Vemis was never really talking about footwear. He was describing a system where quality demands upfront capital, and the absence of that capital forces people into temporary solutions that quietly cost more over time. Not because they're irrational, because they don't have access to the better option at the moment it matters. Strip the story down to its math. One person can afford a durable pair of boots, $50 properly made. They last 10 years. No replacements, no surprises. Another person can't afford $50 at once. They can afford 10. So they buy the cheaper option. It works. Briefly, 1 year, maybe less, then it fails. They replace it again and again. Over 10 years, they spend $100. Twice the money. Worse quality. Constant inconvenience. That's not a failure of budgeting. It's a failure of access. The system doesn't care that the second person would have preferred the better boots. Preference is irrelevant. What matters is what you can pay upfront. If you can't cross that initial threshold, the system reroutes you into a more expensive path and keeps you there. This is where most explanations go wrong. They frame this as a lesson about consumer choices, about buying cheap versus buying quality. But that misses the point entirely. The decision isn't between good and bad. It's between available and unavailable. When capital is scarce, you don't choose the best option. You choose the option that lets you keep going. That logic shows up everywhere. Any solution that lowers long-term costs usually requires short-term liquidity. Any solution that removes friction later demands margin now. And when you don't have that margin, you pay in installments. Not just in dollars, but in stress, time, and repeated failure. This is why the story matters. Not because it's clever, but because it reveals something uncomfortable. The system is structured to reward those who can pay early and penalize those who can't. The math doesn't adjust for intention. It doesn't account for effort. It only measures capacity at the moment of purchase. Once you understand that, it becomes clear that this isn't a story about boots at all. It's a story about access to stability. And if you think this is an old idea, disconnected from modern life, look at how we're forced to buy the most basic necessities today. The same logic is still running. The only thing that's changed is the price tag. The pattern doesn't stop at repairs or durable goods. It shows up in the most ordinary places, the kind you don't think twice about because they feel too small to matter. Over-the-counter medication is a clean example. A single box of generic pain relievers at a corner pharmacy runs about $6 to $8, usually 24 to 40 tablets. The bulk version of the same medication at a warehouse store comes out to roughly $3 to $4 per equivalent box when you buy a multi-pack. Same active ingredient, same dosage, same effect. The only difference is upfront cash. If you don't have $30 or $40 available at once, you buy one box at a time over a year. A household that goes through one box a month spends around $84. The bulk buyer spends closer to $36 to $48. Same medicine, nearly double the cost. Frozen food works the same way. A single frozen meal bought individually costs around $4.50 to $6. A family-size frozen bag or multi-pack brings the per meal cost down to about $2.75 to $3.25. That's a 40 to 50% difference. But the cheaper option requires freezer space and enough cash to buy multiple meals at once. Without that, you pay the higher unit price every time. Small household items follow the same math. A batteries bought in a 4-pack cost about $6 to $7. That's roughly $1.50 per battery. A 24-pack costs around $14 to $16, or about 60 cents per battery, over a year. Replacing batteries for remotes, toys, smoke detectors, and flashlights can easily add up to 40 batteries. That's $60 at the small pack price versus about $24 at bulk pricing. The gap isn't subtle. Baby supplies make it even clearer. A small pack of diapers might cost $10 to $12 for 20 to 24 diapers. That's roughly 50 cents per diaper. Buying a larger box drops the price to about 25 to 30 cents per diaper. Over the first year, a child uses around 2,500 to 3,000 diapers. That difference alone can total $500 to $700 more for families who can't afford bulk purchases. None of these are luxury items. None of these are bad choices. They're necessities purchased under constraint. This is what economists call the poverty premium. It's the extra cost paid, not for better quality, but for lack of access. When you don't have enough cash to buy in efficient quantities, your personal inflation rate increases. You're paying 30, 40, sometimes 70% more for the same life, and because these purchases repeat weekly or monthly, the penalty compounds quietly. Not in a dramatic one-time hit, but in hundreds of small transactions spread across a year. From the outside, it looks like nothing. From the inside, it's constant leakage. But this is still the surface level of the system, the part that happens at the register. Where things tighten even further isn't in what you buy, but in how your money is allowed to move once it's inside the financial system. This is where the system stops being passive and starts actively extracting. Imagine a checking account that lives between $0 and $300, not empty, not comfortable, just enough to keep things moving. Paychecks come in, bills go out. There's rarely a cushion left behind. Now add one variable. A streaming subscription renews for $14.99. It's scheduled, expected. At the same time, a debit card purchase for $28 is still pending. The balance looks fine when you check it, but when both transactions settle, the account dips $20 below zero. The bank doesn't see context, it sees a violation. The penalty is immediate. A non-sufficient funds, or overdraft fee of $30 to $35. Not for borrowing money long term, not for a loan, for being short $20 for a matter of hours. Run the math, you are effectively charged $35 to cover a $20 gap. That's not a mistake fee. That's a pricing model. Now look at frequency. For households without a cash buffer, this doesn't happen once. It happens 2 or 3 times a month. A subscription here, a utility bill there. Each event triggers the same charge. 2 overdrafts at $35 each is $70. 3 is $105. Over a year, that quietly becomes $800 to $1,200 paid in penalties alone. And here's the critical detail. Most of this revenue doesn't come from people mismanaging money at scale. It comes from accounts that never have more than a few $100s in them, from people operating without slack, from households where timing matters more than totals. This is why the word risky gets used. If your account balance stays high, the system treats you as safe, fees disappear, perks appear. If your balance stays low, the system prices you as a risk and charges accordingly. Not because you're likely to default on a loan, but because your margin is thin enough to monetize. This is where psychology enters the equation. When every transaction carries the risk of triggering a fee, decision-making narrows. People check their balance constantly. They delay purchases. They second-guess necessities. Stress rises, but precision falls. Studies have shown that sustained financial stress reduces cognitive capacity. Not by a little, by an amount comparable to losing a full night of sleep. The brain shifts from planning to survival. Long-term optimization becomes impossible when every short-term move feels dangerous. This isn't a lack of discipline. It's what happens when a system forces you to operate at maximum load with no room for error. And money isn't the only thing being taxed here. The same mechanics apply to something even harder to recover once it's gone: time. The system doesn't stop charging you when your money runs out. It keeps billing you in a currency that's harder to track: time. Start with transportation. Without a reliable car, a daily commute stretches. What would be a 25-minute drive becomes a 60 to 90-minute trip each way, using buses, transfers, and waiting time. That's an extra 70 to 120 minutes every day, over a 5-day work week. That's 6 to 10 hours lost. Over a year, it adds up to 300 to 500 hours. Time that can be used for rest, skill building, childcare, or a second income stream. The cost is invisible on a bank statement, but it's real. Laundry is another quiet tax. A household with an in-unit washer and dryer spends about 10 to 15 minutes of active time per load. Without one, a trip to the laundromat takes 2 to 3 hours. Once you factor in travel, waiting, and folding. At 1 trip per week, that's 100 to 150 hours a year. Add the direct cost of machines and detergent, roughly $6 to $10 per visit, and the annual total lands between $300 and $500. Plus, the time lost. Food access works the same way. Living far from a full grocery store means relying on smaller shops with higher prices. A typical convenience store charges 10 to 25% more on staples. To reach a larger store might require a bus fare of $2.50 each way and 60 to 90 minutes of travel. That's a recurring logistics cost layered on top of already inflated prices. Over a year, transportation alone can add $300 to $600, not counting the time. Then there's housing. Long-term renting means every monthly payment builds zero equity. A household paying $2,000 a month in rent spends $24,000 a year with nothing retained. Buying would reduce long-term costs, but entry requires a down payment. In many cities, that means $20,000 to $40,000 front. Here's the lock: and high rent prevents saving for the down payment. Without the down payment, ownership stays out of reach. Without ownership, monthly costs remain high. The system loops. This is the final layer of the trap. You're not just renting a place to live, you're renting predictability. You're renting the ability to plan more than a month ahead. When margin disappears, every part of life becomes transactional. Money, time, energy, all consumed just to stay in place. And once you see how deeply this system is wired into daily life, the definition of financial stability starts to change. For most people, financial stability has been defined the wrong way. It's framed as a number, a salary, a promotion, a target, income where somehow the anxiety is supposed to stop, as if earning more automatically creates safety. But what actually determines stability isn't how much you make. is how much shock you can absorb without everything else breaking. Two households can earn the same income and live in completely different realities. One can handle a $400 repair without panic, the other can't. One treats disruption as an inconvenience, the other experiences it as a crisis. The difference isn't intelligence or discipline, it's margin. Margin is unused capacity. Money that isn't already assigned. Time that isn't already consumed, space in the system for things to go wrong without cascading. And once you understand that, the question changes. Not what should you buy, not how can you optimize every dollar, but where are you paying penalties simply because you don't have slack? Look at your own life. Which fees exist only because your balance runs close to zero? Overdraft charges, late fees, emergency replacements instead of early fixes, higher unit prices because bulk isn't an option. Then look at the other side. What would quietly disappear if you had an extra $500 sitting untouched, or $1,000? How many decisions would stop being urgent? How many problems would stay small instead of escalating? This isn't about becoming wealthy. It's about stepping out of constant fragility, because once you stop measuring success by income alone, you start to see the system more clearly. And when you see the system clearly, you stop blaming yourself for outcomes it was designed to produce. What you've seen up to this point isn't a collection of bad habits or isolated mistakes. It's a pattern, one that repeats across income levels, cities, and life stages. A system that rewards having slack and quietly punishes operating without it. That's why so many people feel like they're running harder every year just to stay in the same place. Not because they're failing, but because the structure around them is extracting value at every point of weakness. When margin disappears, the system doesn't collapse all at once. It leaks, slowly, invisibly, until exhaustion feels normal. Understanding this doesn't magically fix anything. It doesn't make the system fair. But it does something important. It changes where you place responsibility. You stop treating every setback as a personal flaw. You start recognizing the mechanics that turn small gaps into long-term drag, and that awareness matters. Because once you can name the forces at work, you can stop internalizing outcomes that were never fully under your control. You can start measuring progress differently, not by how much you earn, but by how much pressure your life can absorb without breaking. If this perspective helped you see something you hadn't been able to articulate before, share it with someone who's quietly carrying the same weight. And if you want to keep examining the hidden systems shaping modern financial life, subscribe and stay with us. We'll keep pulling the structure into the light.